In this video, I want to talk about managerial leverage. I first got interested in this subject when I saw a video from Ray Dalio, and he was suggesting to constantly think about how to produce leverage in order to increase your output for each hour of time that you invest. I couldn't find too much more about this subject that Ray Dalio had said, but I did find in his book Principles, he talks about the leverage that he operates at. And he says that he typically works at a 50-to-1 leverage ratio, which means that for every 1 hour that he invests in a subject, someone that works for him invests 50 hours. And then he says that that person is typically working at a 10-to-1 or a 20-to-1 leverage ratio with the people that work for them. So I couldn't find much else that Ray said about this subject. So I revisited a book I've read before, a very famous book, High Output Management by Andy Grove. And he has a whole chapter dedicated to this. So the first thing he says is that a manager's output is equal to the output of the whole organization that they're managing, the whole team or organization that they're managing. I think this is really important. For me, this is really important to remember. Only a year ago, I was an individual contributor, and I often fall back to thinking that my output is my individual output. And sometimes if I have a day with lots of meetings, I can feel quite unproductive, and I can feel at the end of the day, that I haven't written any code, and I haven't achieved anything that day. But if I reframe that to thinking that my output is the output of the whole team, I can then look at everything the team's done that day and say that my job is to try to increase the output of the team, try to make the team go faster, and do anything I can to enable the team to release more software, release better quality software. So the chapter continues with some of the key ways that managers can achieve leverage. And some of the important ones were information gathering, decision making, and that can be both decisive or nudging, and finally being a role model. So let's talk about those quickly. Information gathering is any method used to gather information. So it could be group meetings, one-to-one meetings, reading email, reviewing PRs, reading industry reports, watching conference talks, reading Slack messages, anything you do where the goal is to gather information. Sometimes I feel that this activity is a waste of time, so it was good to reread about the importance of it. And the reason Andy Grove says it's so important is because as you have more leverage, the impact of your decisions are greater. So it's important to spend more time gathering information so that theoretically make better decisions. And this reminded me of Naval, the famous Silicon Valley angel investor, who says something very similar. He says that as you get more leverage, the importance of judgment and decision making become greater. If you think about the CEO of Apple, for example, there's thousands and thousands of people working at Apple. So Tim Cook's decisions affect a huge amount of people. So it's very important that he gathers information and tries to make the best decisions that he can. So on to decision making. And he says there's two types of decisions. A decisive decision where the manager is making an active decision. For example, we will be committing to migrating from Jenkins to Circle CI in Q2 of next year. And then there's nudging, which is the manager having a viewpoint with the information they have at that time, but not feeling like they're the best person to make the decision. So they simply nudge it a bit in the direction that they see fit. So an example of this could be an engineer on the team wants to use a new programming language or technology. As a manager, you disagree, or you don't see enough evidence for using the new technology. So you ask them to go away and find more information. And then the last one is role model, which is interesting. It sounds like a very fluffy subject and not something which gives you leverage. But actually, when you think about it, it's one of the best ways to instill values in the team. So imagine there's a value which you think could improve the team's output. Let's say that or the majority of people in the team don't prepare for meetings don't have actions at the end, and they're just generally a waste of time. And you want to instill the value of booking shorter meetings, having clearly defined agendas and output at the end. One of the best ways to do that would be to role model that behavior. At the end of the chapter, Andy goes into some very specific ways that managers can get more leverage. The first one is project planning. I think we all know the importance of planning a project, but I hadn't considered before how much of a tool for leverage it is. If you consider a large project which is cross teams, you've got 10, 20, maybe 50 people working on the project. If that's poorly planned, it's going to be a huge waste of time. So as a manager, any work we can do to plan projects more effectively up front is very important and a high leverage activity. The next one is preparing for meetings. I think we've all been in meetings that have no agenda, no actions taken at the end, and generally just a complete waste of time. So anytime you book a meeting, try to keep it as short as possible to achieve the outcome you want to achieve. Have an agenda. Basically anything you can do to maximize the effectiveness of meetings is a high leverage activity, because meetings consume a lot of time, and particularly when they're group meetings. Another one is teaching large groups. So whenever you're teaching a subject or teaching something to one person, think about how you could teach that to more people. So perhaps you record the session and share it. Perhaps you just invite more people. Or perhaps you don't present it in person at all. Perhaps you write it down and share that with the team, or share that with the whole company. And then the final one, which I thought was very interesting, are performance reviews. I was always aware that performance reviews are important, but again, I never considered them to be a high leverage activity. And actually, when you think about it, they're the highest leverage activity, or one of the very highest leverage activities that we do as managers. Let's say a performance review takes 10 hours or 20 hours for a manager, but that can then motivate a team member for an entire year or 6 months or whatever the review cycle is. So really, performance reviews are very high leverage. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful. And if you want to deep dive into this subject, I recommend checking out chapter 3 of Andy Grove's High Output Management.